Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, more specifically in this instance the Nintendo 64 core, as well as Kaze's new Return to Yoshi's Island demo released just yesterday. This is basically taking the Nintendo 64 hardware and all of the learnings over the last 3 decades to produce a game that would only be a pipe dream back in the day. Pun very much intended because it is Mario and he does go down pipes. And this is basically just a tech demo. Kaze's always uploading new videos to his YouTube channel talking about different innovations and coding techniques in Nintendo 64 to allow better performance and better graphical fidelity out of the stock hardware. When I saw this was out yesterday, I decided we should take a look on MiSTer FPGA because none of the testing notes mentioned FPGA whatsoever. It was emulation as well as flashcards on original hardware, but of course you know we gotta check out MiSTer, and it definitely does work here. And I will say this demo, now that it's been completely reworked, is 100% more impressive than the previous version of this game, and that was already pretty damn cool to begin with. It's so much fun to see how much performance you can eke out of something like the Nintendo 64 hardware if you actually have a really good coding knowledge and a base understanding of the hardware. Because Kaze goes very deep in his videos talking about all of the different intricacies of the hardware on Nintendo 64, all of the different silicon in there, and how much performance you can get out of the game, even going so far as basically taking Nintendo 64 and Super Mario 64 and improving the frame rate in game. But let's pop back to the earlier version of Return to Yoshi's Island, the same bunny brushwood level here, and you can tell that the graphical fidelity, the overall polygon count, and everything else is definitely lower, as is the performance. And that's just because as he's been developing this game, obviously he's been learning more about the hardware, how it actually functions, and basically just going through and trying to button everything else up, and that really is impressive. And I do love that Mips the Rabbit is here for everyone to see, and it really shows that there is a lot more power in the Nintendo 64 hardware than we ever realized back in the day, and that's because Nintendo's SDK was definitely a little bit rudimentary, and they basically just submitted microcode to developers to kind of try to make them work on the hardware in and of itself. It wasn't a situation where all the documentation and hardware was 100% buttoned up and explained to different developers. Even Nintendo with Super Mario 64 made some coding errors that Kaze's talked about in their videos, basically showing how much more performance you could get out of the system with a little bit better code and some more aggressive culling of things that weren't on screen. And honestly, going down this little chute right here, even if we are going to fall to our death, you can see the frame rate is absolutely holds up. And even running around in the hub world here, this is just performance that you wouldn't expect out of something like Nintendo 64. You pair that with an absolutely amazing hub world and just some really great textures and overall graphical and art styles, and you have a recipe for something that is just absolutely 10 out of 10 amazing. And I can't wait to see what else Kaze comes up with in the future, because their ROM hacks and development on Nintendo 64 are just some of the best things you're going to see on the hardware. Honestly, if Nintendo had released this back in the actual runtime of Nintendo 64, maybe if you released this in 1998 or 1999, owners of the Nintendo 64 would have been tripping over themselves to run to the store and buy a copy of this game, and I think it would have reviewed every bit as good as the original Super Mario 64. That is just how talented Kaze is when it comes to these things, not just in the performance department, but in the level layout and design department, because honestly, the prettiest graphics in the world mean nothing if you don't have the gameplay to match, and at least in Return to Yoshi's Island, this demo here, the gameplay is absolutely stellar, and as you see here again, the frame rate is just absolutely singing, and that's why I wanted to test this on MiSTer FPGA, and big thanks to Andy D for helping as well, because it was just one of the platforms that wasn't listed in the patch notes, and pretty much every time a new Nintendo 64 game or ROM hack comes out, I get a ton of messages on Twitter and Discord asking if I've tested it yet, and now you can see it definitely is being tested. And this hub world here again, just the performance, running around, looking at MIP, seeing all of the coins spinning around with a new model, at least it looks like a new model to me. It just has a feel and a vibe and a level of performance that you just wouldn't see out of retail release games during the life cycle of the actual Nintendo 64. And as Kaze continues to improve their coding techniques, you're going to see even more impressive things, not just out of Kaze and his games, but other fan games moving forward. And the soundtrack is a 10 out of 10. Go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back with more.
Yeah!
Just some straight up fun music. And as we move further into the game, again, this is running on the MiSTer FPGA core, the most updated one, and that is the fun thing about Kaze's ROM hacks as well. Sometimes when you see a new ROM hack, it'll be for software emulation only, because it's going to use a feature or something else going on in the software emulator that the real hardware doesn't have configured or doesn't allow. So it's always fun to get these ROM hacks that actually let you play the game on original hardware. And of course, if you do have a flash card, you can load this up and play today, but apparently on some of the EverDrives, you need to load up a different Mario ROM hack, get it running, and then go into this, or else it's going to freeze. So just be aware of that. If you do want to run it on original hardware, it does require a little bit of trickery, but again, this is just basically a recreated tech demo showing exactly what the Nintendo 64 can do, and I love that it actually has some Super Mario Odyssey vibes as well, with these 2D converted to 3D areas, and the textures, all of the different graphical styles, and everything else just absolutely work with Mario on screen at the same time. But I will tell you right now, some of the jumps in this game are brutal. They're 100% achievable. You do have to take your time and really focus on what you're doing, because a wall kick right there is definitely not going to help. And this is what it looked like on the previous version of the game that I featured maybe 12 or 18 months ago on a MiSTer FPGA testing video, and you can just 100% see the difference in graphical fidelity between what you just watched and what you're watching now, and all of those visual upgrades just make this game look that much better. And again, that's what happens when you have decades of time between the actual release of a console and when someone else comes to develop on it. It's not to knock the developers back. In the day that we're making Nintendo 64 games, they did an incredible job, but all of the time spent learning and researching the hardware and coding techniques just really do benefit new developers coming in and making the Nintendo 64 hardware do something you never thought it could. And I love the frame rate in this area as well. It is wide open, so you get a really good draw distance, and you get excellent performance on the MiSTer FPGA core, and that's just down to Robert or FPGA zoom spots, absolutely dialing in everything about Nintendo 64 recreation in FPGA. And that is just a fun combo to pair with something like Kaze's new Return to Yoshi's Island demo. It just shows when two people really take their time and learn something and try to understand exactly how the hardware works, you can get a result like this, and it is absolutely spectacular. And I can't wait to see what else Kaze comes out with in 2025, because there's definitely a lot of life and a lot of legs left in the Nintendo 64, and now with all of these new development techniques, all of this new information, and an FPGA core to boot, I think you're really going to see a lot of new innovations come to Nintendo 64, because I would say 2024 was definitely the year of Sega and Sega Saturn developments, as well as Genesis and the 32X, but I feel like maybe Nintendo's going to have 2025 locked down. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you played this demo yet, and if not, do you plan on playing it? And it does work in a bunch of emulators. I will leave a link to it below. Some work, some don't. I would probably recommend Ares. It's the most compatible in my opinion. And of course, if you have a MiSTer FPGA and you're watching the video, you can just go ahead and load up the ROM right now once you patch it, and you'll be 100% ready to play. The only wrong way to play this game is not to play it in the first place, because it is spectacular, and I love that they even use some of the original music in the soundtrack as well. Go ahead and listen for 30 seconds, and I'll be right back. I love that they use some of the original Super Mario Bros. Music in the game as well, with that throwback texturing, and you'll see here, even in the previous hub world, before you actually get into Bunny Brush Woods, you will see that triangular pattern on the ground. That's basically how the polygons are laid up. So I love that in this demo, and now that it's been rebuilt, you do get a little bit better of a look behind just how the graphics are set up. But the real takeaway is this game is amazing, even if it is just the first world as a new rebuilt demo. The gameplay is spot on, and the frame rate absolutely gets close to 60 frames per second almost the entire run of the game, and I absolutely love that. And it is a fun challenge as well. I wouldn't say it's Kaze 64, definitely not getting close to that level of difficulty, but it's going to give you a great challenge, and if you have MiSTer FPGA, you're going to be able to play it today. But again, I just love stuff like this, seeing Mario recreated in a new way with new technology. It just makes me happy. But short of that, we're done. Leave me a comment down below, tell me if you played the game, and I will see you next time. There's something fun to talk about with MiSTer FPGA and Nintendo 64. Bye bye.